So here's a young reporter who goes off to report on the with my wetsuit and my... But unfortunately, the statues were spread to 200 metres by 30 metres in a very, very foggy part of, very muddy part of the sea. So the visibility was terrible. By the time I came down, they were already diving for about a week. And I do remember, the one thing that struck me, myself and with a photographer, a great photographer, Ronan Quinlan, was that everybody was fighting with each other. And the archaeologists were fighting with the divers. The diving club had got involved, and they spent an awful lot of time down there. And they found nothing. Now, the first line is not a statue in sight. Anyway, we have this artificial lake. It's supposed to be the biggest in Ireland, I think. I've never actually verified that, but we all grew up with this notion that this was, and John Betjeman, who was a poet laureate in England, came and visited Lyons and wrote a lovely poem about the swans there. Life on the estate. These are the books that are kept. That's a rent roll from the 1700s. And these are the personalities that worked on the estate. Jim Tancred's house, people will remember. Ronaldson's house. This is what became Maura Costello's house. It was the fire manager's house. And these are the Barnwell family, and they were very Republican, to the extent that the anti-treaty IRA were operating from Barnwell's house. And this, the last photograph there, is of one of the Lord Cloudcarries in a flax field. In the early 1900s, the family decided that flax would be the future, because the price of flax went through the roof around the time of the First World War. And this marvellous ballad was composed about all the people who came to work on the flax fields of Lyons. There was always a staff in the farm on the estate, but hundreds more people were recruited from Stalbridge and Lucan and everywhere like that. And we might have a verse of that before the end of the night. Again, I'm thankful. Now, this is really important. Wexford reached the All-Ireland final in 1976. They went 2 goals and 2 points to 0 up against Cork. But a few months earlier, Wexford almost got beaten by Kildare. And these are some of the luminaries that did it. Bobby and Noel Burke, no relation to each other, Mick Dwan. The reason they were in Kildare is because they worked in Lyons Estate. And even more importantly, for our clock beat Buffer's Alley, the Wexford champions, in the Leinster Club Championship. The reason that people like Bobby Burke were here was they were working in Lyons Estate. I think Sheila might recognise that photograph. And there's the first Our Clock team to win the hurling champion. Now this is important as well. Not only did the Lyons guys play for Our Clock and Kildare, they also played in a competition which isn't really prominent anymore. I don't know if it even exists, called the Interfirms. And only 2 hurling teams from Kildare have ever reached a Leinster final at senior level. I'm not talking about intermediate or senior B or anything. But when, Greek mates Greek, when you're up against the best, 2 teams from Kildare in hurling went to the Leinster final. One of them was a Camogie team from Our Clock in 1968. And the other was the Lyons Estate team. Walton, O'Loughlin, Doyle, Bryan, B. O'Donoghue, T. Breen, Captain P. Cahill, M. Finnerty, M. Doheny, M. Purcell, Bobby Burke, P. Mulhare, Mick Dwan, Noel Burke, J. Healy. They were the workers in Lyons Estate that went to the Leinster final. They were beaten by Avonmore Creameries, which you'd expect. They had a whole platter of All-Ireland hurlers, All-Ireland winning hurlers, one of whom, Nicky Brennan, came back to open the GA clubhouse in Kildare, in Our Clock in 2003, which Tom will remember. There's a bid for Ireland's royal sites going to UNESCO at the moment. That was the RT News report a few weeks ago. This is our royal site. It's the top of Lyons Hill. This is a survey that was done a couple of years ago, and it's shown all sorts of archaeological evidence. Barrows, different ring enclosures, close to you saw where the trig point is at the top. There's sort of a ring fort there. But that's only half of the action. Because when they did aerial surveys and they tracked where the iron, evidence of iron and buried iron are, they found an awful lot more action. It's never been excavated. But we've a far better idea of what's under the soil now. And you can see the purple points there are the pieces of our major archaeological interest. Some of the others have been disturbed. Did we have people living on top of Lyons Hill? Not exactly clear. A lot of our royal sites, and there are 4 of them up for the UNESCO World Heritage, Rathcroghan is one of them, the Hill of Allen, which would be hugely significant in Kildare, but you've got to remember the Hill of Allen was out of the game by the 600s. Lyons was coming into the game there in the 700s to 1000 AD. And there is a sense that the hill was used as the inauguration point, and the royal family lived somewhere in the valley around. It would make more sense. It would be far too exposed up there. Francis John Byrne, the author of Irish Kings and High Kings, a great UCD early Irish historian, he died a couple of years ago, a professor in UCD, always felt that Lyons was different. He said in a long conversation one day, he told me that Lyons was probably one of the few where there were the royal family were dwelling. Now, we know Lyons was really important from these documents. Hundreds and hundreds of references. Failure Engusing was composed in 800. She Launa, it's a beautiful name. She Launa means the fairies of Lyons. The Din Shanagas had this well publicised where Leon, the princess, the maiden, was pursued by the king, Dutar, and killed on Lyons Hill. That's how it got its name. It clearly is an allegorical because the name comes from the elm tree. In the Book of Leinster, we've 3 separate references to She Launa. And remember, they would refer to all the hills by the word we now use for fairies. I think that's not coincidental. Don't mess with the fairies. The fairies are still in charge. This is the Agad of Shanorach. Cé tosa a macha mar Patriot. Eig mach acha lechterig. Mach rí Lion Andes. Who are you? Says St. Patrick. I'm Hugh, the son of Eoghan, lechterig, half red, the son of the king of Leinster. And I was out on Sheelina Landkaima. She, is now the word for fairy. Sheelina is the hill of lions. Landkaima is of the soft apron. You know, when the mist would sit down. Hes agus roibea mamachershi. Now the poem goes on, but the key word there is hamana. He was playing hurling and he was kidnapped by the fairies and held ransom for 3 years. So if anyone knows why our clock won 13 different Kildare hurling championships. Laur na carta. Is day not be a shinanal, is there tower agus lean, ken deva ka. There'll be a war every year. There's a curse put on in the Book of Rights that there will be a war every year between Lyons and Tara. And we'll come to exactly where that was coming from. Because the Lyons kings, they were kind of based out of our clock, were a bit uppity. They were not afraid of taking on the High King. The calendar rolls, we're now in the 1100s. Look at it. Remember in 1154, Lewin, Newcastle of Lyon, Lyons, the Nova Catherine, the Leona Cashling, Leonisum, Castle Lyons, and eventually Lyons in 1837. We have 3 churches. 2 of them on site and 1 very important locally. Those beautiful angels that you see on top of the doors, they were put there in the 1300s. Absolute a display of the wealth and the influence of Lyons Church at its time when it was in the hands of the Aylmers. That's the Sadleir photograph that was in the Kildare Archaeological Journal. And people still buried in Lyons Churchyard. The oldest graveyards are from the 1750s. But people are still buried. It's called the Relic Inn. And then we have Clonaglas. You can see Clonaglas coming up here. It's out in this little clump here, behind. A few references from around the 1200s, lawsuits, the Inquisition, the ancient town of Clonaglas at this stage, and there it is on the map. And it's associated with two saints. We think around the 700s, around the time of the Battle of Confi, but also they bear the same name as two daughters that were supposedly baptized by St. Patrick. This is the adjoining hill, obviously. But Uachtarard and Lyons are intertwined massively. The patron saint of Uachtarard is called St. Bridget, different saint's day and a different origin. And this guy, giolkf of UCD, thinks that the reason Uachtarard has a round tower, there's loads of theories why different sites, or some sites have round towers and some others don't, is that it was a royal site. So Uachtarard possibly started out as the royal church of the kings of Leinster that were based in Lyons Hill. These are we haven't had that many families, 5 families brings us 1,200 years. It's quite amazing. That's unusual around here, where, the land was all forever being seized. I wanted our clock to put capital of Leinster on the approach signs, These are the most famous kings. Their names don't mean a lot now, but some of them featured very, very, and that's a stone which we don't know much about. It's in Lyons Churchyard, but it may be the king's stone. But the key to the kings is, these are the Ardclough guys, these are the Naas guys, and the other side are the ones buried, based down in Mullinmast in the south of the county. And they managed to swap the kingship. They alternated the kingship between 3 families. This was hugely difficult because they'd be falling out every now and again, and but these are the key conflicts that established the dynasty that lived in Ardclough at the heart of the action in Viking Age Ireland. The last one, Moan Crinnog, Hereward the Wake. If anyone remembers BBC in the 1960s, there was a programme called Hereward the Wake. Hereward the Wake fought in the last of those. It was on the site of where Killeen's golf club is now. So the Kings of Leinster, there was a little bit of internal conflict between the 3 different dynasties, but they more or less held it together until Norman times. And the family that lived in Lyons then ended up the Mullinmast family in the south became the O'Tooles. The Naas family dynasty became the O'Byrnes. They were transplanted to Wicklow. They lost their land. They spent the next 300 or 400 years raiding the new arrivals. But the Ardclough guys were a bit cuter. They did a deal. They changed their name to Fitzdermott, and they were given serious land out in Killiney. Obviously, they were reading the property section of the Irish Times. And Dolphin's Barn, Carn Udulcha, comes from their place name. So while the O'Byrnes and the O'Tooles got displaced, the Lyons, the O'Donoghue family, lost their base in Lyons, but they managed to get sort of deals in semi-mountainous land around Dublin and keep the shape together. A couple of things happened then. William de Hereford got the land, didn't hold on to it very long. It went past to a group called, the next family names closely associated with Lyons is the Tyrrells. Quite a few references to them, but the most interesting one is that one of them was accused of raiding passers-by on the road to Kilcullen, which is the main road to Cork now, and he wasn't sentenced to death. He was put in Dublin Castle and not fed. So they just put him in the dungeon and starved him. So that's in the calendar rolls as one of the horrible justice things at the time. The Aylmers, interesting family, acquired Lyons through marriage. They married a Tyrrell, and they are remarkable. I say we only have 4 or 5 families, including Tony Ryan's now, that had Lyons for all the way back to Norman times. But the Aylmers were astonishing how they held it together. They managed to back the wrong side. They managed to back the right side in the Silken Thomas rebellion, then back the wrong side in the 1640s, back the wrong side again in the 1690s, and yet managed to hold the land when confiscations and things were happening. And they were very, very strong, never very friendly with the Fitzgeralds. They opposed the Silken Thomas rebellion, always more closely allied to the Butlers of Ormond than to the Fitzgeralds of Maynooth. Considering the proximity to Maynooth, you would have thought that would put them in a difficult position. But they were very careful about their alliances and always managed to find an ally or an alibi at the crucial moment when things were going badly for them. One or two of them were nationally famous at the time. One of them was the enforcer, the lawyer who took over the confiscated lands for Henry VIII. And I always think it's more than a coincidence that Gerald Aylmer's first confiscation was the St. Wulstan's Abbey in Selbridge. So the Ardlough guys confiscate the Selbridge lands at the very first chance they get. Mighty out. Oh yeah, I see. No expense spared. Here's the list of Aylmers here. Lovely stuff in the annals there. Going to hostings, bringing horsemen. I always call them the Knights of the Laden Table because 4 or 5 of the Aylmers got in charge of the army provisions. That means you acquire all the grain, the hay for the horses, and you rake a bit off the top all the time. So instead of being the Knights of the Round Table, they were the Knights of the Laden Table. Mary Aylmer and this guy here, Michael Aylmer, is the last of the line. Now, remember this family. We saw their names flash by. They've held the land through every single war, from Norman times right up to almost 1798. And how did they lose it? A horse, my kingdom for a horse. Michael Aylmer gambled it away. Not the first and not the last Kildare man to lose a lot on the GGs. This is the High Sheriff of Kildare. There's absolute rage in the Freeman's Journal because the High Sheriff of Kildare has turned up at the races in the Curragh, and obviously all the gentlemen scattered because they all owed the sheriff back taxes. And they're dreading an arrest by the civil officer. We forbear making any remarks on that gentleman's conduct in this instance, wishing it may prove to be otherwise, when, as suggested by our correspondents, a trick in office. They were saying this is unacceptable for the sheriff to show up at the races because Michael Aylmer and all his mates who owed money were... And we had races in Selbridge, by the way, very close to the Commons on the road out the Ardlough Road. Michael Aylmer lost the land, he went into debt, and the Cloncurry family took over, the Lawless family. The castle was huge. There's very little of it left. That's effectively the gatehouse. It was destroyed in 1642 and never really rebuilt. So all we have is a gatehouse of a castle, a large... I suspect the stones were then taken to be used in the construction of the house. And this is the year it burned. Simon Harcourt, I provided some household stuff. You see what he got? Flagons, wines, silver cups, a castle we took from Lyons, called the Castle of Lyons. January the 31st, 1642, Harcourt's army came into Newcastle and burned Newcastle. We think we burned Lyons the following day. We know that he rounded up, he found, most people had fled, he found 7 people locally and hanged them and pillaged their houses. And every castle that's from around here, Atgo, Secumney, Castle Dillon, Uachtarard Castle right beside the graveyard, every single of them has a record of having been destroyed at that time and reduced in value. So it was this was the total war. This is the visiting of total war in our county. The harvest was left unharvested in 1642 because there wasn't enough men to gather it. I mean, 2 armies came through because General Monk's army came through 3 weeks later, and they were the ones who carried out the massacre in Rathcoffey. If you know in Ardras, there's a field called the Horses Field behind That's where General Monk stabled his horses. That war, that 1640s war, is really complicated. There were three sides between the Cromwellian, what became the Cromwellian parliamentary side in England, the royal side in England, and the Irish side, which is the Duke of Ormond, which was not the Duke of Ormond. The royal was the Duke of Ormond, and Eoin O'Neill was the Irish side, the Confederate side. And some of the guys changed sides. The Lord Erlinge Quinn changed sides twice. Clareman, he changed. And General Monk, even, who was marching through here originally for the parliamentarians, changed to the Cromwellians. And there's an Irish march, if anyone's into Irish traditional music, called General Monk's March, which is really slow because it was supposed to signify he was so reluctant to go into battle against his own fellow soldiers. So Elmer has lost. He started borrowing money in the 1760s, and in 1796, Nicholas Lawless told him he was taking all his estates off him. Nicholas parodied a little bit as a wool merchant and a blanket man and a carpet man and all of that, because he'd come down from Wicklow and started selling wool and then became a banker, but he accumulated a lot of wealth very quickly, and he was quite well known for lending money to the old moneyed classes, including the Aylmers, and then foreclosing on them unexpectedly. So Aylmer lost Lyons, his family having held it forever since the 1300s, and Nicholas Lawless didn't really come to live here. He lived in what is now the Marion Hotel in Dublin, but they started the construction of Lyons House in his time, and he died in 1799, and all of what happened in Lyons and the canal bank that we saw where the Clifford Lyons is now is associated with his son, who is Valentine Lawless. That's the Lawless coat of arms at Lyons House. So you see Nicholas, Valentine, Edward wasn't there, but Valentine F, who we'll meet again, Frederick, and then the title 16, Kathleen, and Mark Wynne was a cousin from Yorkshire. Some of the best maps of 18th century Ireland are from two great map makers who came to Lyons, and they rejoiced in the names of Rock and Roll. I think there's a song in that, we were the rock and roll kids. This is Valentine Lawless, the Patriot peer, wonderful what modern technology can do. And he is the most famous, the most interesting character. We're not going to spend a lot of time on him. He was one of the leaders of the 1798 rebellion, imprisoned twice in the Tower of London, spent time in exile in Paris and London, came back. This is 1798. This is an appeal from his father, Cloncurry. Cloncurry, by the way, comes from one of the Aylmer estates out near Kilcock. You know where Cloncurry parish is. Valentine Lawless has been apprehended. First time ever that was announced in the Irish House of Commons that a member was apprehended. The idea was to put pressure. That's the rebels assembling on Lyons Hill. Anyway, he comes back and he runs into the father and mother of a scandal. That's Georgina, his wife. And the original photograph you saw a second ago was Lord Cloncurry, young Lord Cloncurry, back in Ireland. He's got a reputation to repair. He's treated with suspicion by the authorities. And John Pearce, this guy from Westmeath, Belvedere House. It's a beautiful place to visit, by the way, if you're travelling out Mullingar. Belvedere House has storyboards telling this part of the story as well. Georgina was married to Valentine when she was 16. She was now 21. And John Pearce was obviously a very handsome, attractive and sweet-talking guy. And we ended up with a divorce scandal, which was huge. This is how, in those days, there wasn't a News of the World or a Sunday World. This is what they did, was they published these cartoons, and everyone was having a laugh at Georgina and John Pearce's expense, because the guy painting the ceiling was the one who noticed. They came into the room not realising there was someone painting the ceiling over them. Lord Cloncurry against John Pearce. And this is how Valentine Lawless wants to be remembered. Hibernia and himself. It's an illustration that's in in UCD now, it's a bust of the two of them. It's a very famous bust. It was used as the cover by Karina Holton that we saw briefly there. We've had 3 major biographies and many minor biographies of Valentine Lawless, and she was the last one to be published a couple of years ago. Her, the main thrust of what she did in the book, and the book is, the first 2 or 3 chapters of the book are great, the rest of it sort of, she just falls into things, but the main thrust of her book is that when Cloncurry was alive, when Valentine Lawless was alive, he more or less made out that he was misled young fella to get caught up in all that rebel 1798 business. And she makes it quite clear he was very much at the heart of the action. Not only he was at college with Wolfe Tone and Thomas Addis Emmett and was almost expelled for revolutionary activities when he was only 17, but he was also very involved in recruiting alliances and founding alliances for the United Irishmen in London. So he ended up in the the Tower of London twice. He'd probably have been executed if he hadn't got the huge connections he had, the huge wealth his dad had. Money may have changed hands. And that's the epilogue of Karina Holton's book, where she talks about the great tributes being paid to this guy. But she makes the point that 50 years later, after all these wonderful, the good Lord Corry is dead and Ireland will deplore his loss, 50 years later, it is almost like he never existed. His granddaughter, very famous, that's a painting she made herself, Emily Lawless. Yet still their love comes home to me after Aughrim. School children learn this. Fighters in every clime, every cause but their own stirring words. The reality is she was a unionist. She was someone who sympathised with Ireland but had no faith in its ability. And this woman here, Larson, has done the latest biography of her, tries to place her in the feminist sort of, among the feminist movement of the late 1890s, 1900s, but makes a very good point. When she's remembered for her poetry here, she was a very famous novelist, massive novelist in her time. Again, her day came and went, and within a few years, people really don't remember Grania, Hurish, all those novels that she wrote. She was difficult for the feminist movement to embrace because she was opposed to women's suffrage. She didn't want the women to get the votes. What is really interesting is that 2 of her nieces were mad suffragettes. 2 of the young girls in Lyons, Kathleen and Mary Lawless, were out campaigning like the mother in Mary Poppins, giving women the vote. Auntie Emily was not so impressed, she was much more of the old world. She moved to Surrey, and she named her house there Hazelhatch. That's the house. And she was buried under a Celtic cloth. But this guy was her brother. He has responsible for 28% of the evictions in Ireland. He's best remembered here now because of the Lord's Road. He built it straight so that there's a threat in a letter to him. But he built this straight road so that he couldn't be assassinated. Absolutely straight. That's the drive into the sunset along the Lord's Road, L5063. And we have a lovely plaque, but the date is crucial here. That's his death. And then a year later, his brother dies. And then Kathleen inherited the place. And it passed from the Lawless family around 1959 and to via cousin. These are the ruins of the houses. And it shows how great, how important all of that stretch of buildings, where the cliff at Lyons is now, were along the canal. That amazing mill, 4 stories high, that's a diary of the night it burned down. And there are the Shackleton sisters in the boat in front of it. Views of the canal dockyard, the hive of activity, boats being repaired. It was a stopping point, we had a hotel there. It was a major stopping point for the passenger. The passenger boats didn't last very long because the railways brought an end to it. And it's still, getting a new life there as the canal heritage. These are the Lawless family. That's the evicting landlord with the big long beard, unmistakable. And they had 2 major houses. They're the Shackleton sisters setting out on their bicycles. And these are some of the photographs of the Lawless when the Lawlesses still lived in the family, and there they are today. Their coffins in Lyons Church. Kathleen was the very last of them to go. Interesting thing in Queensland. The town of Cloncurry was named for the Cloncurrys of Lyons because Frederick Burke, the cousin of Lady Cloncurry, was married to Valentine F, discovered the river there in the 1850s. This is something I think that Tony Ryan came back, and Tony Ryan was a huge fan of Knocknagow, that terrific Charles Kickham novel. Matt Wins, up Tipperary. Tony Ryan was a great Tipperary man. He called his pub Matt the Treasures. And when he came back and found this ruined village at Lyons, it was almost like he saw it as a mission to make Lyons his Knocknagow and rebuild it stone for stone back to the honour and glory of the little village. Knocknagow was no more, Lyons was no more. And Tony Ryan arrived and said, okay, I've got these amazing buildings. That's an early photograph of him touring the site. Very important part, Lyons UCD still own the hill. More than 20,000 UCD students have been through Lyons down the years. And almost a lot of the lab work was done out there. People did postgrads out here, crop research. And I'm going to finish up with a poem by this man. Noel Burke walked these lands, and he wrote that, a couple of years ago, quite a few years ago. It's a longer poem than that, but the finish up of it is, side by side they lay, the noble and the humble, in greens no different from each other. I do love the notion of finishing up my talk with a poem by Noel Burke and not by Emily Lawless. Okay, I suspect we can have a lot of chat here, a lot of discussion. I'd like to ask, Mona, what's your memory of Lyons when you were growing up?
My granny lived in one of she became the gatekeeper for one of the lodges. And I had a glass of pony, a cow and a pony, as well as firemen and milk and vegetables.
Yeah.
My grandfather worked around the house and sort of handyman.
And did people lose their jobs when the UCD bought it? Or was
passed on by then.
Yeah.
But I think I don't quite know. Like at that stage, the houses weren't kept or anything. People wanted to move out to other places, you know,
Yeah.
to there'd be more comfort. And look, it was a different place in those years anyway. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
Because
The canal had died anyway, you know, the traffic in the canal.
You know, I remember the Loch Yard people working, like Dick Carty died in 1952. He was a blacksmith there.
Oh, wow.
In the Loch Yard. And my father died the same year, a few days after him actually. But were different times, you know.
Yeah.
My mother used to talk about it, and they used to pick potatoes down the fields near the loch, and the boatmen going along in the boat singing, you know, and the sound of the voice of the water. Calm evening, it used to be lovely. I often heard her say that, you know. So, but I get a good letter about the flax. It was my aunt that wrote that.
Your aunt wrote the poem, very good.
And they all remember the flax because they worked at it.
It was hard work, I gather, yeah.
But it was up around Brookstown, I think.
Flaxfield. There was a lot of action in that Lockyard village, you know, when you consider we had a hotel, originally Barry's Hotel, and then Shackleton's relation of Ernest Shackleton family ran the mill. And then we had a police station as well, a two-storey. It's something that we had a police station on the canal, and we had a police barracks on Boston Hill. We had two police locations, very close. Now, it could be that we were particularly troublesome. There was that story of the rebels assembling in 1798, and then there was, during the Tithe War, the Lyons Hill was used as a rallying point for people. So it could be that the stations were built to try and keep the locals under watch.
Well, I think the Lord himself had a lot to do with it too.
Yeah.
He was very well liked.
Yeah.
Especially by the mothers. Their daughters.
You said you were going to.
It's the Flax Harvest of 1919, and I haven't learned it off, and sadly I'm not. I'm going to have to do which I hate seeing done all the time. People consulting for the words, but anyway, here we go. Let's get on the bar stool and imagine a creamy black pint, and off we go. Oh lads, this Kildare is a wonderful sight, where the boys and the girls in the flax take delight. We've worked at it morning and evening as well, and now that it's finished, the tale we will tell. On 17th March we commenced the big task. Mr. Thompson came home and some labour he asked. We all volunteered, for good workers are we, and into the farmyard ne'er thought of the fee. A jolly old crowd, as John Cook ought to know. At dinner we danced on the heel and the toe. Duck Egg says himself he was often near gassed, for going for his grip he has ne'er been surpassed. Joe Carroll would be there, and Sonny too, of course. Johnny Behan and Malone, and all the whole force. The Selbridge crowd and Galvin's, 3 of them so true. Mrs. Devine and Young and Old, and the McDermotts too. I've never quite worked out who Duck Egg is. We're still working on that. He's featured in another ballad, and he's a very well-known character. To bring all this crowd into this song would not do, as we'll limit the number, just to mention a few. We'll think of Miss Buggle wherever we roam, and of the Temple Mills cads who'd be better off at home. We'll think of Carey and Atkins and Oughton and White, Molly and Bridie, whose skirts were too tight. J. Burke and Doyle and Larry Ryan too would gather up ripping heads till their fingers were blue. That's it. Now we've no air for this, but this is a competitor who decided to enter with a poem of his own. The Flax Harvest. I am a poor labouring boy, I will not tell my name. I wonder could we get a tune for this? I am a poor labouring boy and will not tell my name. I do not claim to be a poet, and soon you know the same. I've worked a while, the rippling of fine flax you know. I never will forget the sport, no matter where I go. It was on the 17th of March the machines did start to roar, and now it is the 1st of June, and the job it is all o'er. And every day at dinner time a shed we would resort, with poor Paddy Duck Egg to have some gas and sport. Larine would court Miss Buggle till the sweat ran up his chin, and then his wife grumbled at him, and it was so shocking. Think Jim Ryan with Julie Lynham, they played a noble part, and the rigger to his little mot told the sense of his heart. So there's lots of cavorting and amour affairs of the heart there. Great.